Dinosaurs and the horror genre have always had a complicated history. In the past, it's been proven that both of these elements can work well together, and we've seen this in the form of video games, books, short stories, comics, and so on. But in the context of film, the idea has never really been executed all that well. Sure, you could argue that certain dinosaur movies, namely Jurassic Park, does have some horror elements to it, but at most, these elements bring this movie up to the label of a sci-fi thriller rather than a sci-fi horror film. After all, it was meant to be family friendly, so it makes sense that they wouldn't take the intensity too far. And the same could be said about most dinosaur movies both during that point in time and prior. A lot of movies explored other genres including comedy, action, adventure, pulp science fiction, and so on. Horror didn't really play a huge role in most, if not all of these films, but in the 90s that would all change with a new dinosaur movie that came out in theaters in 1993. This movie is called Carnosaur. Carnosaur is a Roger Corman produced low-budget exploitation horror movie that's revolved around genetically engineered dinosaurs made by a mad scientist who created them for the purpose of destroying the human race and letting the prehistoric monsters reclaim their world as their own once again. The movie was actually based on a book by the same name that was released all the way back in 1984, and its very loose movie adaptation would be released about a month before Jurassic Park, and was made within a span of only 18 days, which you'll learn soon enough is pretty standard for a Corman production. As a result of its rushed production and low budget, the movie has been panned and ripped apart by both critics and the general public alike over the last several years, with some of the most consistent criticism coming from the fact that it was only made to capitalize off of the hype and success of Jurassic Park. And while there is a lot of truth to that statement, the story actually goes far, far deeper than that, which I intend to explore today. Along with that, a lot of things would result from the first Carnosaur movie, including two sequels titled Carnosaur 2 and Carnosaur 3 Primal Species, along with two other kind of sort of spin-off films called Raptor and the Eden Formula, and along with that, there are a couple of other on-screen examples that are loosely attached to this franchise that I'll get more in-depth with later. Bottom line is that there is a lot more to this franchise than what people might think at first, and it goes beyond just the movies. Today, we're going to be exploring an over 2-decade-long story about an infamous franchise that, to this day, is either seen as one of the greatest or one of the worst examples of dinosaur horror. But before I get started, I want to take this time to thank Joseph Palinkas for helping me with this video. Palinkas had actually written an article on Carnosaur for the Quarterly Digest magazine called The Lost Films Fanzine on their third fall issue of 2020. And Palinkas would actually reach out to me to talk about another project that he's working on about Carnosaur, which is in the form of an upcoming film book about the franchise that he plans to release sometime next year if we're lucky. Completely by chance, I had been working on my own video on Carnosaur by the time he reached out to me, and we ended up helping each other out with a little bit of the research. Prior to even contacting me, Palinkas had actually already gone above and beyond with his research by managing to get some exclusive interviews with some of the people behind the Carnosaur franchise and get some good insider information about it, some of which he revealed to me to use in this video. So again, thank you so much to Palinkas for helping me out. This video would not have been the same without his contributions. I'll leave all of his socials in the description down below so you can follow him and his current project on Carnosaur. Oh yeah, and as always, I'm going to spoil everything about this franchise. So if you're interested in it and you want to experience it yourself, I'll leave links to where you can find the book and the movies so that you can read and watch them yourself before watching this video. But anyways, we have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Our story begins with the man who would write the Carnosaur book, who went by the name of Harry Adam Knight. Knight was actually one of several pseudonyms used by film and sci-fi author John Raymond Brosnan. Some of his other aliases that you might know him better as are James Blackstone or Simon Ian Childer. Of course, for the entirety of this video, I'm just going to be calling him by his original name. Brosnan was born on October 7th, 1947 in Perth, Australia, and while there's not a whole lot documented about his early life, it would be around the mid-60s when he would become a more avid science fiction fan, along with exploring his love of film, and by 1970, he would end up moving to the UK with these interests, where he would subject himself to the science fiction and film subcultures of London, which is also where he would find all sorts of writing work in the form of a movie critic, a journalist, and of course, an author. In his lifetime, Brosnan would write a total of 23 novels. Some of them were film history books like James Bond in the cinema and Movie Magic, the story of special effects in the cinema. But he would also dabble in fiction as well under different pseudonyms. For example, he would publish books like Torched under the name of James Blackstone, he published books like Tendrils and Worms under the name of Simon Ian Childer, and for books like Slimer, The Fungus, and of course Carnosaur, he would publish them under his Harry Adam Knight title. The areas of fiction that Brosnan would write about are science fiction and what's specifically described as comically exaggerated horror. And if you've read his Carnosaur book, this shouldn't come off as too much of a surprise, as Brosnan's dinosaur story was inspired by those older 50s monster movies that, by today's standards at least, do look pretty comically exaggerated. But Brosnan took this inspiration and mixed it with his own style that included tongue-in-cheek humor and plenty of gore and violence. However, in an ebook published online in 2007 called You Only Live Once, Brosnan would explain the book's origins. It was 1983. A colleague of Brosnan's, Alan Jones, worked as a film journalist and would visit Hollywood to get the scoop of the kind of films that were being worked on over there. One day during that year, he would return from one of these trips and informed Brosnan that Hollywood was in the process of conceptualizing a line of dinosaur films that were to be the next big trend in the movie industry, results of which were to be expected as early as the following year in 1984. So Brosnan thought he'd be smart about all of this and use this information to his advantage to write his own fictional book about dinosaurs and release it around the same time as the expected dinosaur movie trend so that he could capitalize off of it. When he finished the book, he would send it to an editor at Star Books who had actually previously helped him with another one of his books called Slimer, and was able to secure them as a publisher as well as a company called W.H. Allen & Co. to publish his book in Great Britain. Everything was all set, and he would get his book published in June of 1984 as he planned. What resulted was a book that held back no punches. It was very explicit with its violence and gore and sexual content. And as we go through the book, you can tell that Brosnan was not afraid to be graphic with any of it. The book is revolved around David Pascal, who lives in a small English town known as Worcester. Pascal doesn't feel fulfilled with his job as a small-town journalist, especially since the paper he works for, the Worcester Times, doesn't allow for real stories to be written, like scandals or corruption among authorities or anything like that that could potentially ruin the town's reputation. Instead, Pascal was stuck writing boring things about a town that had very little news to provide. That is until one day, a string of murders is reported to the local police station. One report was a farmer who woke up at around 2 a.m. that morning to investigate strange noises coming from one of the large buildings housing his chickens, only to be gruesomely attacked by some unknown animal. Whatever it was had opened the farmer up with a large gash that ran from his neck all the way down to his groin. His wife had been found dead too, just outside of the chicken house with no injuries, as she suffered a heart attack from the scene of her dead husband being eaten by some unknown animal. After she heard a struggle coming from the chicken house, she decided to go outside to find her husband, only to witness the scene and scare off the animal in the process. Another murder that was reported was from a more disturbing case of a 21-year-old man picking up a 15-year-old girl to do some funny business out into the woods. During their session, they're attacked by an unknown assailant that kills the man and sends the girl to drive off in his car in a panic. She would end up crashing the car into a tree, which would launch her body through the windshield and breaking her neck in the process. Because Pascal was friends with some of the local policemen, they allow him to come along to the farmer's crime scene where they take a look at the body and suspect a wild animal attack. After witnessing the dead body, Pascal realizes the opportunity and attempts to be the first to report the story, only to be told that the story had already been reported by a spokesperson working for Sir Darren Penward, who's a very rich and powerful figure who owns a private zoo, and from what Pascal is told, it seems that one of Penward's Siberian tigers had gotten loose and was responsible for these murders. What was strange about these murders was that they were reported about 30 minutes before the police even knew about them, meaning Penward's first priority was most likely damage control rather than trying to alert the proper authorities. Immediately, Pascal senses there's something not right here, and this is only further corroborated when Penward shows up to the scene and insists to the police that they let his men handle the situation. Pascal tries to voice his suspicions, but nobody, not even his ex-girlfriend and writing partner Jenny, seem to believe him. The attacks only continue, with the next victim being a 9-year-old little girl riding her pony in the woods near her home. The assailant's focus was on the pony, but with a simple swipe, the animal ends the girl's life quickly and proceeds to go after the animal. Shortly after, the girl's mother and younger brother are attacked by the assailant as well, with the mother's neck getting slashed right in front of her son. But before the attacker charges at the child, a group of Penward's men show up and tranquilize the animal. The kid, whose name is Simon, was able to get a good look at the creature before he was taken away by the men. And it's because of this, the men actually consider the idea of killing Simon to keep Penward's secret safe. But they eventually decide against it since he was very young and no one would believe him anyways. Along with that, Simon was in a very catatonic state from what he had just witnessed. However, when Pascal and Jenny eventually make it onto the scene, Pascal is able to question the boy and confirms that it was not a tiger that attacked him and his mother, but rather, it was a dinosaur. From here, Pascal is determined to get more answers about Penward and his private zoo, while everyone else, including Jenny, seem to think that he's going a bit too overboard with this story. Pascal starts poking around, asking questions from different people around town, which of course gets him into some trouble and gets him nowhere in the case. However, Pascal is able to find a solid means of getting more information in the form of Penward's wife, Jane, who seems to have taken a liking to Pascal, so he uses this to his advantage and begins to lead her on. This leads to a sexual relationship between the two for the next several weeks, which, from the perspective of Lady Penward, was all it was meant to be. But the more the two met up, the more she opened to Pascal, revealing that she was very unhappy with her husband due to him being obsessed with his animals and just being very insane, calling him a sadomasochist who was into being dominated, let's just say. What's worse about all of this is that she's unable to escape this marriage, as if she did, Penward would use his wealth and power to ruin her life. And he refuses to let her go because he's a public figure and he feels like a divorce with his wife would make his public image look bad. Jane begins to fall in love with Pascal, not realizing that he's only doing this to get closer to Penward's secrets. And Pascal is able to get a massive break in the case when Jane ends up inviting him to stay with her at Penward's estate while he's away in London on a business trip. Pascal seizes the opportunity, and when he gets a chance to break away from Jane, he explores the inside of the property, where he finally discovers what Penward had been hiding from the public. Within one of the buildings of the private zoo was a living 6-foot-tall dinosaur, more specifically a Deinonychus. Before Pascal had any real chance to react, he gets shot by a dart, which knocks him out. When he awakens, he sees that it was Sir Penward that had shot him, and it's here everything about Penward's dinosaurs are revealed. Turns out, Penward had been cloning dinosaurs by using their fossil cells from rare fossil specimens that still contain them, decode the dinosaur's genetic information, detect the chemical makeup for each gene's codons through a microscope, put that information through a computer to compare the dinosaur's genetic material with that of a modern animal's genetic material, find out what codons have to be altered, and then change them to modify the cells of said modern animal. The animal cells they decided to go for were chicken cells, which makes sense considering birds are modern dinosaurs, and because of this, when the chicken cells undergo the necessary changes, they then replace the chicken's reproductive cells with the now modified dinosaur cells, wait until the egg cell is formed, then grow that egg cell through artificial means until it's ready for the incubation process, where it will then hatch a baby dinosaur should there be no issues along the way. From this experiment, Penward had been able to clone several dinosaurs, including a pair of Deinonychus, a sexually frustrated Megalosaurus that was cloned with no mate and is destined to be alone forever, a Tarbosaurus, the largest theropod dinosaur in the bunch, a Plesiosaurus, the only aquatic and non-dinosaurian animal created, a Dilophosaurus, which you all should know what that looks like, a Scolosaurus, an Ankylosaur and the only armored herbivore, a baby Brachiosaurus, which was the only sauropod, theropod, an Altospinax, which seems pretty random, but an interesting choice nonetheless, and of course a pair of Tyrannosaurus rex young that are revealed later on. Due to the dinosaurs' unfair chance at life, with their reign being abruptly ended by a meteor strike, and his personal obsession with dinosaurs, Penward took it upon himself to invest his money into genetic engineering, not only to recreate the long-extinct animals, but also reintegrate them into the world, where he believed they will have a second chance at life after the inevitable World War III that will give humans a disadvantage. Penward hates people, considering them to be the least appetizing specimen of the animal kingdom, and doesn't care what happens to them as a result of this event. After Penward gives up all this information, Pascal is then imprisoned, but is held by Jane to escape. Before he manages to leave the premises, however, he turns back when he sees Penward's men had kidnapped Jenny and were in the process of taking her back to him. Pascal goes back to get her, which infuriates Jane, who this entire time was under the illusion that her and Pascal were in love, but once she realizes this to not be the case, she goes back into the private zoo and literally lets all of the dinosaurs loose out of anger. This actually indirectly gives Pascal and Jenny the opportunity to escape and make it back into town to alert the authorities of everything that's happened. As you'd expect, the cops don't believe them, until of course they start receiving reports of various dinosaur attacks being made to the regional area. The dinosaurs wander around the streets, neighborhoods, rural areas, and in the plesiosaur's case, the waters of Worcester, attacking innocents and wreaking havoc. The police force and soon the British Army are called in to take action, and little by little, the dinosaurs are killed off. A team of firemen show up and spray the Tarbosaurus with multiple of their powerful hoses, forcing it inside the nearby mall, where its weight destroys the pillars holding up the second story, causing it to fall down and crush the theropod dinosaur to death. The Megalosaurus would wander its way onto a nearby road where it would get hit and killed by a truck. The Dilophosaurus had made its way to a nearby neighborhood before it was shot down by a literal tank. The army brought in a Scorpion tank to shoot down a Dilophosaurus. Kind of funny, not gonna lie. But the tank is then destroyed by the Scolosaurus as it bashes its tail against it hard enough to blow it up. But using all the firepower they had, the army was eventually able to shoot and blow up the Ankylosaur. The Plesiosaur had been located to be in a nearby lake, where grenades were thrown into its vicinity until it was fatally wounded by one of them. The Altospinax was eating a cow in a field when it was spotted by the army's helicopter team, who proceed to chase after the dinosaur and headshot it with their cannon gun, killing the dinosaur instantly. And finally, a Deinonychus was shot down on Penward's property, serving as the final dinosaur threat in this conflict. Of the surviving dinosaurs, there was the baby Brachiosaurus, which was kept alive as it didn't pose a threat to anyone, and it was going to be taken by scientists to serve as an attraction. Then there was the 2 Tyrannosaur eggs that had been taken by Penward. During the ordeal, Penward's leg had been impaled by the horn of a bull, which had been kept there on his property to be used as dinosaur food. This didn't stop him from saving 2 of the T-Rex eggs and tranquilizing and capturing his wife in the process. In a pretty fucked up way to end the Penward story, Sir Penward takes himself, the eggs, and his unconscious wife to an abandoned farmhouse, where he would start a fire in the fireplace to keep the eggs warm, tied up his wife, and sat on an armchair by the fire before eventually dying from his wound. By the time Jane would wake up, the baby Rexes had finally hatched, and they would begin to painfully pick flesh off of her little by little, essentially eating her alive. And she would be in this condition while trying to scream for help for the next 12 hours. In the final segment of the story, Pascal visits Jenny at her house. She still lived with her parents and sister, but when Pascal finally showed up, he found that they were all brutally murdered, except for Jenny, who was nowhere to be found. Turns out, the army had forgotten one of the dinosaurs, a second Deinonychus that then attacks Pascal, chasing him out of the house. Pascal runs to the greenhouse in the backyard, finds a pitchfork, and manages to fatally impale the dinosaur, stabbing the pitchfork deep into its thorax. He also manages to find Jenny, who is still alive but severely injured, as the Deinonychus had not only mauled her but also tore off her arm as well. But she's able to pull through when she's taken to the hospital. The story ends on a rather mysterious note. Despite all of the dinosaurs being dead, at least as far as he knows, Pascal is unsure if this was really the end of it. Maybe, somewhere out there, there were still more of Penward's dinosaurs. John Brosnan's Carnosaur has a lot of great elements to it that makes it a genuinely good horror book. It allowed its dinosaurs to be gruesome, monster-like animals. It delivered on some very intense and even nerve-wracking moments. It had a lot of disturbing scenes play out that you probably wouldn't normally see in other dinosaur media. Overall, I personally really like this book, even if it was only created to get ahead of a dinosaur Hollywood trend. That being said, unfortunately for Brosnan, this plan of his would completely backfire, because 1984 came and went, and there was no sign of this supposed Hollywood dinosaur movie trend anywhere to be seen. And to add insult to injury, on top of this book failing to get ahead of a trend, it also just did poorly in general, as it would completely flop in sales. Despite this failed attempt at foreshadowing, Brosnan still liked the way his book came out. Sure, he knew he created it only to try to get ahead of a trend. He even ends up calling it a hack book, but in his words, as hack novels go, I thought, and still do, that Carnosaur was pretty good, and I also thought, at the time, that it might do well. It didn't. But things weren't over for Carnosaur, as a few years after its release, one of Brosnan's colleagues, another science fiction author, Lisa Tuttle, would go visit her hometown of Austin, Texas, and when she eventually returned, she would inform him that there was actually a cult following for his Carnosaur book over there. A couple of years later, possibly as a result of this news, Carnosaur would get published in the US by a small paperback company called Bart Books in February of 1989. However, this company would become defunct shortly after. A Polish edition of the book would also be released in 1991 by Phantom Press that has some pretty cool cover art, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the actual story. I mean, just look at it. It looks like an actual, monster, not a dinosaur. I don't know, but at least it looks more interesting than its previous counterparts. Aside from learning about this cult following and going through with the US publication, the rest of the 80s would prove to be pretty slow for the Carnosaur book, and I guess Brosnan didn't really have any kind of plans for it either. But then, the 90s came, and everything would completely change for Carnosaur. First off, on November 20th, 1990, science fiction author Michael Crichton would get his newest techno-thriller novel published that went by the name of Jurassic Park. According to Brosnan's perspective on the matter, he stated, "Intrigued by reviews that lauded Crichton for writing about dinosaurs in a way that no one had ever done before, I actually bought a hardback copy of the novel and noticed a lot of interesting similarities between it and Carnosaur. I was pondering on what to do about the situation when the call from Corman came." We'll get to who Corman is in a bit, but let's derail this video to talk about the Carnosaur book and its similarities with the Jurassic Park book. One cannot talk about the history of Carnosaur without bringing up Jurassic Park and the fact that the source materials were suspiciously similar to one another. Carnosaur features a rich asshole who brought dinosaurs back to life via genetically engineering them and kept them inside his private zoo. Jurassic Park also features a rich asshole who brought dinosaurs back to life via genetically engineering them and kept them inside his private zoo. With these similarities, some people automatically resort to saying that Crichton ripped off Brosnan's idea. However, the story behind these similarities might be more complicated than what's shown on surface level. Now, I want to preface this part by saying that I think all outcomes that I'm going to be presenting right now are 100% possible. I think it's 100% possible Crichton read Brosnan's book. I think it's 100% possible he maybe used some ideas to contribute to his own. I think it's 100% possible this all could have just been a huge coincidence. That being said, considering both authors to the source materials in question have passed away, I don't believe we're ever going to get a definitive answer regarding these similarities. But based on what we do have, we can speculate a little bit. So we already know the origins of Carnosaur. It was a failed attempt to get ahead of a Hollywood trend that never happened. According to Michael Crichton, the origins for Jurassic Park actually started all the way back in 1983.
I remember in the early 80s walking on the beach with Marvin Minsky, who was at the AI lab at MIT, and saying in this very tentative way, I'm thinking about doing a story about a genetically engineered dinosaur. And he said, oh, well, yeah, that could probably be done one day. which I found very encouraging.
Before it was known as Jurassic Park, it started out as a screenplay of a story centered around cloning a pterodactyl with fossil DNA. However, Crichton realized that it would be more realistic to present the story in a way where the science of genetic engineering was used for means of entertainment. So he changed some things up and decided to set the story in a theme park and have it be from the perspective of a young boy. He would write a draft for this story, sent it to the same 5 or 6 people he always sent his drafts to for feedback, and everyone hated it. This would be followed by more drafts, but the response was the same. People just hated his Jurassic Park story. Finally, it was confirmed that the reason why it was receiving this kind of feedback was because the story was being presented from a kid's point of view. They wanted a story that was for them, an adult. So Crichton wrote the Jurassic Park that we know today, and everyone liked it. Considering his book was not published until 1990, it's still very possible Crichton read Brosnan's book. However, there are a few things to note. First off, as mentioned earlier, the Carnosaur book flopped and didn't reach any huge mainstream success, so the chances of this book coming across Crichton's radar was likely, but not definitively, low. Second off, between the mid-70s and early 80s, biotechnology and the science of genetic engineering were reaching a certain level of popularity due to the advancements that were being made on them during that time. This is actually pointed out in the introduction of the Jurassic Park book. And as far as the dinosaur elements go, both authors had different reasons for why they decided to include them, but both of which still had something to do with a dinosaur craze. Brosnan's was just aimed towards a future craze, while Crichton's was aimed towards the general craze that the younger generation had for dinosaurs. He became interested in how kids viewed them and how dinosaurs impacted their lives and wanted to make a book out of that. It only changed after the reception he got from his early drafts. So, with this trend of dinosaurs and genetic engineering, is it really that hard to believe 2 authors had the same idea based on these 2 aspects? Maybe to some, but if you think yes, keep in mind that both of these authors were actually late to this idea because the concept of genetically engineered dinosaurs being kept in a zoo can be found as early as 1980, with Robert Silverberg's short story Our Lady of the Sauropods, which features a scientist getting stranded on an artificially made nature preserve housing genetically engineered dinosaurs made from fossil DNA. Now, I need to emphasize that the argument is not to say that anyone here stole anything from someone else. It's to prove the point that the basis of this idea wasn't exactly original when Brosnan got to it. Could Crichton still have read Carnosaur? Of course. Could Brosnan have read Our Lady of the Sauropods? Sure. Could both authors have? Yeah. Could this whole thing just be a big coincidence because all 3 authors noticed this trend of genetic engineering and decided to incorporate dinosaurs in their stories for their own reasons? Absolutely. For me personally, I really don't know what to think. But if Crichton were to have read Carnosaur, to go as far as to say that he stole anything from it isn't fair in my opinion. Because as far as the similarities go with Carnosaur and Jurassic Park, on surface level they are very similar, but going into specifics, there are some major differences. Sure, in both stories, dinosaurs were genetically engineered, but the processes are very different. Carnosaur used DNA from dinosaur fossil materials to reconstruct chicken DNA and use it to birth modern dinosaurs. Jurassic Park extracts dinosaur DNA from blood-sucking bugs found in amber that dated all the way back to prehistoric times. Carnosaur takes place in a small English town where the main antagonist keeps his assets in a private zoo. Jurassic Park takes place on a fictional island that's planned to be a tourist attraction so that people can see the dinosaurs themselves. Carnosaur's rich bad guy wants to purposely unleash the dinosaurs into the world to give them another shot at life. Jurassic Park's rich bad guy wants to essentially keep them imprisoned within the boundaries of a remote island. And the reason why they escape is because he has a false sense of control and is unwilling to understand the instability of his fallacies. Once again, everything that I have provided here isn't definitive, and it's possible that my own speculations could be completely wrong. but it's worth bringing up and you can base your own thoughts around it, or maybe even contribute by adding on to similarities or differences between the books. Let me know in the comments down below. But going back to the main story, sometime around mid-1991, Brosnan would be indirectly approached by B-movie legend Roger Corman, who was interested in making a movie adaptation of his Carnosaur book. Maybe things were finally looking up for Brosnan's little horror novel after all. Or was it? So before I continue this part of the story, we need to talk about Roger Corman for a bit. For those of you that don't know who this is, Corman is an American filmmaker and producer who's best known for his several low-budget sci-fi horror exploitation films. Corman started making B-movies all the way back in the 50s, and as recently as 2021, he's still shown to be at least producing them. Between his start and now, Corman would make over 400 films as either a director or a producer. But that's not even the most impressive thing about this guy. I think for you to fully understand the story of Carnosaur, we need to take a quick look at Corman's life as a filmmaker. According to the man himself, Corman had always been interested in film, but when he attended Stanford University in his college years, he would graduate in 1947 in engineering, and shortly after, he secured a job as an engineer that he kept for all of 4 days before quitting. His passion was in film, and he did manage to get a job working at 20th Century Fox. However, he started out only as a messenger, but eventually he worked his way up to becoming a story analyst, where basically he would read over and critique scripts, write some notes and comments about it, and send it back to the writers. Most, if not all of the scripts that Corman was handed were what he described as hopeless, and because of that, he never recommended any of them. However, one day he was given a script that he ended up finding somewhat decent, so he'd take some notes on it and eventually sent it in as a recommendation for the story editors to polish and prepare for the next steps. This script would eventually become a Western film called The Gunfighter in 1950, and because this script was successful enough to spawn a film, the story editors were given a nice bonus and some recognition. Despite analyzing and recommending the script, Corman received no recognition, and of course, he wasn't very happy about it. As a result, Corman would end up leaving Fox to do his own thing. For the next few years, Corman would collect funds from family and friends and use it to make his own movie, which would eventually come out in 1954 and was called Monster from the Ocean Floor. For this movie, Corman did a lot of the production and behind-the-scenes stuff all by himself. And when he realized this was possible, he decided to continue making movies. The movie would prove to be successful too, so he would use those funds to make another movie that he would release the following year. But something became apparent very quickly to Corman. During this time, Corman would have to save and collect money for his cheaply made films, do his best to stretch the dollar and make it work, release the film, and wait until it earned its money back to start a new project. The problem was waiting for this money to come in, if it came in at all. That was the other issue in the movie industry. It was never guaranteed that you'd make your money back. Corman decided to rectify this problem by partnering with a newly made film distribution company called American International, where basically he would make them a movie that they can distribute on the condition that they gave him the money back in advance so that he can use it to push out more films in less time. They would begin with a 3-movie deal, all of which followed the same plan, and soon Corman was beginning to make films on a more regular basis. This is how Corman would get his start, and because of this, one of several major things would consistently happen in Corman's career as a film director and producer. He would end up employing many people as actors or directors or writers or something of the like who would end up making it big in the film industry. People like Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, Ron Howard, Jack Nicholson, Joe Dante, William Shatner, and so many other big names would get their start working on Corman films. From the early 60s on, Corman would go through different phases and eras as a filmmaker. He'd start different trends and became somewhat of a big name in his own way in the industry, with many referring to him as the King of the Bees. At one point, his films would even reach higher levels of success. For example, his 1966 film, The Wild Angels, which, by the way, featured Bruce Dern and Diane Ladd, one of which whose name may or may not have some relevance later on in the video, would end up becoming a financial success, being considered the highest grossing independent film of that year. It seemed that Corman was doing really well working as an independent filmmaker, however, he still experienced some obstacles along the way. Due to some unwelcomed interference from the American International Company for one of his movies, Corman decided to part ways with them in 1970, and in the same year, he formed his own film production and distribution company called New World Pictures. But because he essentially gave up his outlet to make somewhat decent films on a regular budget, Corman had to resort back to making B-movies in a similar way to when he first started out. The following year, he decided to retire from directing movies and stuck to just producing them. Later in the 70s, there would also end up being a huge shift in Hollywood. In 1975, Steven Spielberg's Jaws would release in theaters, and only a couple of years later, in 1977, George Lucas's Star Wars would also release. These were pretty much the same kind of movies that Corman had been making for years. Adventurous, science fiction, creature feature movies, the major difference between the two was the budget. Corman had always made them as $100,000 exploitation flicks that would feature in grindhouses and drive-in theaters, but somewhere down the line, Hollywood realized that they could make the same kind of movie with a multi-million-dollar budget and with mainstream marketing and distribution. This would end up becoming very difficult competition for Corman because now that everyone was attending more major theaters, the popularity of drive-in theaters and grindhouses were reaching their end, and as a result, Corman had to resort to releasing his stuff direct to video. He was also having a hard time accepting how people were viewing his movies. While Corman is a businessman and his intent was to make money off of his films that he would stretch a dollar for many times, he didn't seem to like the idea of people referring to some of his films as ripoffs of the mainstream ones. For example, he didn't like that his 1978 Piranha movie was called a ripoff to Jaws, because in his head it wasn't meant to be a ripoff of that movie. If anything, it was meant to capitalize off of the trend that Jaws had started, and this wouldn't be the only time Corman would do something like this. You know, try to capitalize off of a trend started by an influential movie. But he would approach it in different ways, but we'll get to that in a second. In January of 1983, Corman would sell New World Pictures, and apparently the day after the sale, he would announce his new movie production company called Concord New Horizons. And just 10 years later, through this company, Carnosaur would be created. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. There was still a lot that led up to the Carnosaur movie. It would also be through this company, Corman would find someone by the name of Adam Simon, who would eventually become the director for Carnosaur. Simon had attended college to pursue his passion for film around the mid-80s. He first attended Harvard, where he would complete some work for documentaries along with making his own film called Swamp Song, which he would also win an award for before he would eventually make his way to USC, where by 1987 he had made another short film called The Blue, along with producing plays for a group called The Actors Gang. According to a Dinner with Five episode that featured Corman, he talks about how he goes about meeting new talent, confirming that sometimes people approach them for work, but a lot of the times Corman and his team will approach newcomers, with some of them being fresh out of film school and in other cases, some of them still being in film school. He also states that they select some of these people based on their thesis film.
We were looking at film school graduates. Each year they do their thesis films and they will have a screening or you can ask for them. So we look at the graduate films of all three things, and when people found that out, they started calling us.
This is how Corman would find Simon. One day, sometime in the late 80s, when Simon was living in East Hollywood, he would find a script left behind on his doorstep with the familiar Concord New Horizons logo on it. The script was titled Paranoia, and it would later be retitled to Brain Dead, and Simon was sent the script to see if it was any good. He seemed to like it and was tasked to update it for modern audiences, and later on, Simon was also given the opportunity to direct it. It was the the first film that he directed under the Cormans, which was released in 1990. The film would be met with positive reviews and even made back a decent amount of its money. Shortly after, Simon was offered another opportunity to direct another horror movie for them called Body Chemistry, but Simon turned them down. However, in 1991, he would return as a director for the second installment, Body Chemistry 2, Voice of a Stranger. At this point, it seemed that Simon had gained some confidence when it came to the movie industry, and he was ready to work on bigger and better things and broke away from making these kinds of movies in the hopes of making projects with Hollywood studios. During all of this, more specifically in 1990, Corman was on a book signing tour for his autobiography, How I Made 100 Movies in Hollywood and Never Lost a Dime. And this was also around the time Corman would get a hold of the Carnosaur book. Now, I'm going to stop here real quick just to say that there are a couple of different versions to this story that I've heard. The version of the story that I've heard most during my research for this video goes that while he was on this tour, Corman would make his way to a bookstore in Berkeley. While there, he would ask the employees if they knew of any books that would make for a good monster movie, to which one of the employees would recommend Carnosaur. And one of Corman's associates, Mike Elliott, who would go on to be a producer for the Carnosaur movie, stated at one point, Roger bought the movie rights to the book feeling that there would definitely be a market for it. And when he heard about Jurassic Park going into production, he felt that now was the time to shoot our movie, because he knew he could make the movie faster than anybody else and get it out there first. So when you hear this version of the story, at least for me, it comes off as if everything just happened to fall in place for Corman. Corman buys the movie rights to a dinosaur horror book, but decides not to get to it right away for whatever reason. Maybe he was busy with a bunch of other movies at the time. At one point during my research, I remember Corman saying that there was a point when he had been working on like 10, 12 films at the same time. So maybe this was just a case of him having his hands full and being too busy to get to the Carnosaur movie right away, right? Maybe he's so preoccupied that he forgets about Carnosaur until just a couple of years later, the Jurassic Park film gets announced. And with the opportunity present, this reminds Corman that he himself has his own film rights to a dinosaur book that he can whip out and make a movie out of as well to capitalize off of the success of this mainstream summer blockbuster. I don't know how other people interpret this story, but every time I hear it, it feels like everything, Corman finding out about Carnosaur just a couple of years before the Jurassic Park movie gets announced was all just a coincidence. But was it? In a very obscure and more recent interview that I found of Adam Simon by a YouTube channel known as Monster Party TV, it gives a different story to these events. Before I give you the story, I do recommend watching this interview yourself if you're a fan of Simon or just like hearing about behind-the-scenes stories to movies, because this interview has a lot of that and it was a pretty fun listen. But in this interview, according to Simon, he says that Roger Corman and Michael Crichton were actually friends. And when Crichton's Jurassic Park book was released, Corman immediately knew, before any film rights were secured or announced for Crichton's book, that it would be successful enough to spawn a movie adaptation. And because of this, he knew he had to get his own dinosaur movie at the ready so that he can take advantage of Jurassic Park's inevitable success.
The genius of Roger is, he knew he wanted to do a piranha with this. Mm-hmm. But he knew it long before Spielberg even got it, because he also was friends with Crichton. They would and when the book came out, he didn't wait till they announced the movie.
Yeah.
When Crichton's novel came out, Roger said to himself, that's going to be a movie. It's going to be huge. So he was looking for a book then right away, and he happened to find this book by the pseudonymously named Harry Adam Knight.
However, like I mentioned earlier, Corman didn't like when people viewed his movies as ripoffs. Just like with the whole Piranha Jaws thing that I mentioned earlier. So in Corman's head, if he secured the film rights to a different dinosaur book that he could make a movie out of, then people couldn't call his movie a ripoff because the source material was different. Corman didn't care about the source material for Carnosaur. He just wanted the name out of it so that people couldn't mislabel his movie as a ripoff. This partly explains why he didn't follow any of the source material. Though you could make the argument that even if Corman did care about the source material enough to try to feature anything that's in it, there was still the matter of budget to take into consideration. But the budget for this movie has its own very complicated story that I'll get to in a bit. Going back to Adam Simon, I mentioned earlier, he attempted to get his foot in the mainstream door, but things didn't really go as planned. According to Simon, I had basically reached a point where I had been spending a lot of time knocking on major studio doors and having nothing come out of it. I felt like I was too young to be sitting on my ass and not doing anything. So I decided to stop worrying about when the big studios were going to notice me and just do my own thing. And that's about the time Roger called with Carnosaur. And Simon didn't want to turn this opportunity down, not only because at the time he wanted to keep himself busy with work, but also because he didn't want to fall victim to directing the Carnosaur sequel. According to Simon's logic, the curse of any young filmmaker is that if they turn anything down, they are doomed to direct its sequel. Right after I did Brain Dead, I was offered the original Body Chemistry and turned it down. Guess what I ended up directing? Body Chemistry 2. That's why I jumped at Carnosaur, because if I didn't, I knew I'd end up directing Carnosaur 2. So let's pause this part of the story real quick and go back in time just a little bit to John Brosnan for a second. In 1991, Brosnan received a phone call from a Julie Corman, Roger Corman's wife. According to the author, back in mid-1991, an American woman rang me one morning and asked if I was Harry Adam Knight. Suspicious, I told her I sort of was. She then said she was Julie Corman, the wife of Roger Corman, and that not only did Roger want to buy the film rights to Harry's Carnosaur, he also wanted me to write the screenplay. This was exciting news. An opportunity like this was too good to pass up. So naturally, Brosnan was heavily considering the idea and agreed to meet with Mrs. Corman at a drinking club that same night, where she and him would talk about it more, and eventually an agreement was made and a very informal but temporary contract was put together on one of the club's napkins. It was settled. The rights to a movie adaptation of the Carnosaur book were given to the Cormans, and Brosnan got to work on the first outline of the screenplay. While it's unknown what exactly Brosnan included and didn't include from his book in the first outline, it was clear that he was under the impression that the budget for the movie was going to be bigger than the typical Roger Corman production. He then sent it to Corman, who didn't have the best communication with Brosnan, initially contacting him through a payphone during a stay in Paris, at least according to the author. But eventually, Corman would get back to him properly, and the two would get down to talking about the first draft. Corman, who was working as an executive producer for this movie, would make some suggestions before he would tell Brosnan the surprising news. Carnosaur was only going to have a budget of $1 million. Brosnan was disappointed to hear this, because with a budget that small, he figured he'd have to dial back the dinosaur sequences in his outline, to which Corman then insisted that that wasn't necessary. He told Brosnan to just write whatever he wanted for his outline, and that he would just make changes to it in later drafts of the screenplay. So that's exactly what Brosnan did. He finished the outline, sent it to Corman, and didn't hear back from him again after that. Brosnan was not at all a part of the movie's production, nor was he kept in the loop. All he was needed for was to agree to let Corman have the rights to make a movie out of his book, and that's it. Not even Brosnan's screenplay was used, as he would find out later through one of Corman's people, who eventually answered back to his many faxes to them, where they would say that even though they thought Brosnan's outline was okay, Corman was going to use other writers for the job. In truth, Corman wanted a writer that was more familiar with his work, and it's likely this was going to be the plan the whole time. Brosnan did imply that there was a brief waiting period for the contract for the film rights to be made, signed, and sealed, so it's possible that during that time, Corman was just trying to lead Brosnan on by making it seem like he was going to be involved with the movie adaptation for his own book, but in actuality, he just wanted to make his own dinosaur movie with the Carnosaur name to capitalize off of Jurassic Park, and just wanted to kill time before the contract was officially made. This is just speculation, of course. It should be noted that because there were so many people involved and they all have different stories and maybe some misrememberings of those stories, on top of the fact that everything here took place a long time ago, not everything is going to be definitive, and some things about it are just left in the air that we might have to speculate on. But going back to the story, a total of 3 script drafts were made for Carnosaur, one of them being from John Brosnan himself, and another coming from screenwriters and producers John D. Brancato and Mike Ferris. But they ended up dropping out of the project to focus on other obligations. Overall, Corman wasn't satisfied with any of them, so he approached Simon once again in the hopes of having him write a proper screenplay, since he seemed to like what he wrote for Braindead, and around January of 1992, Simon accepted the job. However, what he was told in the beginning of this project and what ended up resulting from it are 2 very different things. According to Simon, when he was first brought onto this project, Corman told him that it was going to be his most expensive movie of his entire career. We're not talking about a $100,000 budget or even a $500,000 budget. Corman guaranteed Simon that the movie would have a minimum budget of $5 million. And on top of that, he also told Simon that he thought they could get another $5 million from some other people, presumably investors, but Simon never specifies. Sure, a $10 million budget is still just a fraction of what it cost to make Jurassic Park, but considering this was coming from an independent movie producer, a $10 million budget was nothing to shy about, and it could easily be worked with, at least compared to the much smaller budget that they're used to working with. So Simon got to work. However, Corman had a few rules when it came down to what he wanted out of this movie. According to Simon, he said, "Read the novel if you like, but this is what I want. I want something called Carnosaur. I want it to feature genetically engineered dinosaurs, and I want a Tyrannosaurus Rex in it." The neat thing about making that kind of Faustian bargain with Roger is that once you give him what he needs, everything else is very free and pretty much up to you. I think the most surprising thing about all of this is that apparently Corman had given Simon 6 months to read the book, do all of the research he could on dinosaurs and genetics, and write the script based on that. And that's exactly what the young director would do. He would read the novel and he would end up liking it, however, he wasn't a huge fan of the book's campiness. And while he was completely fine with humor being added into the movie, he wanted to keep it somewhat serious. And even though Simon was given a lot of freedom with this script, and he was given the confirmation of finances that would support it, he knew that at the end of the day, this was still a Corman production, and it still needed to fall within his regulations and filming schedule. So that meant he couldn't include a whole lot of the dinosaur roster that featured in the book. But he couldn't complain too much. According to what he told Fangoria magazine, he said, "I loved the idea of doing a classic dinosaur movie, and I had never really worked with effects and creatures before. It also didn't hurt that Roger was giving me a lot of time and freedom to write the script." It all sounded like it was too good to be true, and it turns out, it was too good to be true. Simon would write a script that he was satisfied with, and had written it with the several $million budget in mind. However, about 2 weeks before they were set to shoot the movie, Simon gets called into Corman's office, where he's notified that there ended up being some issues with the money, and overnight, their $10 million budget was cut down to $5 million before being cut down again to $500,000. Which at the time was the standard budget for Corman movies. So when it came to the movie's budget, there was never really a consistent amount reported. It seems that nowadays, the consensus for the movie's budget was $850,000. But in all actuality, the movie's cost fluctuated a lot and different amounts were reported. In an Eye to Eye with Connie Chung TV segment, there's a point where they say the movie has a $4 million budget.
Corman made it for $4 million. Or about what Steven Spielberg spent on frosted donuts for the crew of Jurassic Park.
The same budget was also reported on another TV segment.
Even though his $4 million budget is pocket change next to Jurassic Park, Corman says his movie is just fine.
The American Film Institute catalog's website states that other sources reported a budget beyond $4 million, saying, despite various reports of a final $4 million budget, the January 27, 1993 HR stated that Corman included an additional $2 million of special effects, raising the total budget to roughly $7 million. In the July 1993 issue of Fangoria, it states that the budget for the movie was rumored to be under $1 million, but gives nothing specific. But in that same Fangoria issue, Simon confirms that there was a point where he wrote a script for the movie when it was going to be $3 million. But when it was pulled back, he had to cut out some stuff, including a graphic scene in which an entire family is slaughtered by dinosaurs, and a scene that would have featured the T-Rex fighting an airplane, of all things. According to Starlog's Dinosaur Movies, the Complete History magazine, the reported budget was $1.3 million, but apparently other sources closer to the movie's production confirmed it to be closer to $800,000. And as of now, it seems like people are in agreement that the film was around $850,000, but according to Simon, it was even less than that, being more around $500,000. Things would get even more convoluted when Simon also stated that there was a Roger Corman interview with Connie Chung, and during that segment, Corman lied, saying that he had spent more than $5 million on the movie when the budget was really less than $1 million.
And then, look, it's getting all this attention. And oh, look, Connie Chung. He's going to be on Connie Chung on NBC Nightly News or whatever nightly news she was on. He says, and Connie, it's the most expensive film I've ever made. I can't be exact, but I spent far more than $5 million on this film.
Oh no.
Of course, Simon wasn't too happy when he caught wind of this, because now he had to deal with the stress that people were going to expect an over $5 million movie, but the most that he would be able to deliver was one that wasn't even $1 million. But Simon worked with what he had and made the final draft of the script. When it was all said and done, the script would be sent to potential cast members, including Diane Ladd. As I mentioned earlier, Ladd originally appeared in Corman's 1966 film, The Wild Angels, giving her a successful start to her career as an actress, and in many accounts of the story, basically Corman had this IOU from her, or, basically this unspoken agreement that if he ever needed her for work, she would return to feature in one of his films. And this was the case for Carnosaur. However, at first, Ladd wasn't going to do the movie. It had been a long time since Wild Angels, and since then, she's managed to make it big in the industry. So if she was going to play a role in this movie, Corman had to pay her more money. Shortly after, Ladd would receive a check in the mail with a lot of zeros. The offer was too good to pass up, so she took it. And in case you didn't know, Diane Ladd is Laura Dern's mother. The same Laura Dern that would feature as Ellie Sattler in Jurassic Park. I've noticed that some sources that have covered this story in the past make it seem like this was some giant coincidence. And while they may be joking, I don't think this was at all a coincidence. If Laura Dern was not featuring in Jurassic Park, Corman would not have used this IOU that he has had from Diane Ladd for years for Carnosaur. This is what Corman does. This is the businessman side of him. No doubt, from the research that I've done, he's a nice guy. But at the end of the day, if he can take advantage of an opportunity to increase the popularity of his film, including inviting an actress that he knows personally who's related to another actress in a multi-million-dollar summer blockbuster, he's gonna take it. Along with this, Clint Howard was also invited to star in Carnosaur, who also worked on a couple of other Corman-related projects prior to this one. Along with them, the cast consisted of Raphael Sbarge, who you might have seen from My Science Project, a movie that I've talked about briefly here on the channel before. There was also Jennifer Runyon, Harrison Page, and Frank Novak. Okay, so we focused a lot on the story aspects leading up to the movie, but what about the real stars of the show? What about the dinosaurs? The dinosaurs for Carnosaur would be created by special effects artist John C. Buechler, who's previously worked on films like Forbidden World, The Dungeon Master, Reanimator, Ghoulies, and Demonic Toys, just to name a few. But Buechler's most well-known credits are his work for horror movie franchises, including Friday the 13th 7, A Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 6, and Halloween 4 and 6. One day, Corman would set up a meeting with Buechler to go visit his shop at the company that he worked at, Magical Media Industries, but didn't tell Buechler what the meeting was for, at least not at first. According to Buechler, he wanted to come over and see the shop. He came over, walked around, and looked at things. He asked me if I'd ever made any dinosaurs before. Buechler hadn't made dinosaurs before, but he wasn't necessarily a stranger to them or their design. He would show Corman a dragon that he made, which he seemed to like, and Buechler also mentioned that he helped direct some of the Land of the Lost TV show from 1991. Corman would then ask Buechler if he was able to create dinosaurs, to which Buechler said yes. And that's when the movie producer would finally reveal to him that he was working on a dinosaur movie and sent him a copy of the screenplay. Basically, Corman wanted to get an idea of what was and wasn't doable for a movie that was planned to only have practical dinosaur effects. Buechler would explain, saying, "What he wanted me to do was tell him what was, let's say, economically suicidal from a low-budget standpoint and make a report. I had done this before when I worked for Roger 10 years ago. I started breaking them down and reading them and giving my opinions on what is feasible and practical, and also giving him some ideas of what I thought was working pretty well dramatically and what I thought wasn't working well." This would go on for a short time, where drafts would be sent to Buechler, he'd look them over, give his thoughts regarding the effects, and send his notes back until one day Corman had a draft that he was satisfied with and announced that he was ready to make the movie. However, he mentioned something that would catch Buechler a bit off guard. While Corman wanted the film to be 100% practical, he didn't want the use of opticals or stop motion for the dinosaurs. This was mainly due to the fact that both methods were very time consuming. I'm sure you all know the process of stop motion at this point, but if you don't know what opticals is, it's a method where two parts of a film are shot separately and then put together in an optical printer that makes it so the two elements are simultaneously playing in the same frame. The problem with this method that Corman had specifically was that you didn't really know what you had until it got back from the lab, and if there were any mess-ups, it would require more time and money to fix or redo. With the exclusion of stop motion and opticals, this would prove to be a difficult obstacle for Buechler to overcome, especially since, according to a couple of different sources, including a different interview that I found on YouTube with another special effects guy named Jeff Farley, and a more recent interview with Simon that he did for Inverse, Buechler only had about $50,000 to work with. Despite the obstacles, he would eventually find a way to make everything work through means of forced perspective. Forced perspective is the illusion that something that appears to be far away is actually closer to the camera than it may seem at first. This is accomplished by having a smaller element of the film in the foreground while having the bigger element in the background. And under the right perspective and focal point, the two elements look like they're closer to each other than they really are and can be recorded simultaneously. You can see this a few times throughout the film, especially with the small T-Rex puppet in the foreground, with the actual real-life quarry in the background. What was great about this method is that what you see is what you get. There was no need to go through a whole waiting process to see if you got what you wanted to film. Instead, you got whatever was already being displayed on screen. Along with this, miniature sets were also created, as well as several versions of the dinosaurs. The T-Rex alone had like 4 or 5 different versions made for this movie, all of which were supposed to be a different scale and size. They made a puppet version of the T-Rex, a 3-foot mechanical version, they had a 7-foot backup suit that never got used in the movie, and they made a life-sized version of the T-Rex that stood somewhere between 16 and 18 feet high. Then there was the Deinonychus, of which there were also many versions of. There was a hand puppet that was controlled by Simon himself in some parts of the movie. There was also a rod puppet, a cable puppet, a 1-foot mechanical version, and an 8-foot costume version. It made sense that there were different versions of the Deinonychus because in the movie, we follow it from when it first hatches to when it becomes an adult. Of course, Buechler didn't create all of these effects himself. His team consisted of Jeff Farley, Kenneth J. Hall, Anthony Dublin, John Crawford, Ted Haynes, and Mike Jones. In total, the team had about 10 weeks of pre-production before shooting began, so they had to come up with ways to create their dinosaurs from scratch in a short amount of time. And of course, Corman had his own set of rules when it came down to what he wanted the dinosaurs to look like. According to another obscure YouTube interview, this one with Jeff Farley, he confirms that Corman didn't care about accuracy or the trend that Jurassic Park was setting with their dinosaurs. Instead, he wanted his dinosaurs to be more akin to the old world 50s, 60s movie-style dinosaurs, the ones that stood up straight and dragged their tails.
He wanted a Hollywood dinosaur, is essentially what he told me. He didn't want to go with the current trend, because there had already been like some Jurassic Park leaks, and everybody kind of knew where things were going at that point. But Roger wanted to go completely, 1950s, 1960s style dinosaurs. He wasn't interested in making them accurate or current.
When it came to the dinosaurs' appearance, the studio also brought a consultant, that being none other than Don Glut himself, who worked alongside Buechler and his team to overlook the dinosaurs, though I'm not entirely sure how much he actually contributed. But it was his first on-screen motion picture credit, so that's pretty cool. At one point, despite the fact the guidelines seemed pretty clear to keep the dinosaurs in the 50s, 60s style, Buechler mentions, "We stuck very close to what dinosaurs actually looked like. And in fact, I hired Don Glut and we kept them very realistic. Don Glut checked in on almost a daily basis to make sure they were being created to a proper physiognomy. I hesitate to compare them to dinosaurs done with similar techniques on earlier movies, principally because dinosaurs in those earlier movies looked like shaggy people in suits. And I think they were used very effectively in the picture. So if I were to compare these dinosaurs with other dinosaurs in earlier movies, I'd have to say that we used a similar technology with regard to the photographic methods. But in terms of actual creation of the creatures, we went towards state-of-the-art creature effects as we know them today. Make what you will of this statement. As far as everyone else's job goes, Farley was assigned to help sculpt the miniature T-Rex and supervise the lab. Kenneth Hall was assigned to create the bigger full-scale props. Anthony Dublin was in charge of coordinating the miniature models on set. John Crawford was hired to manage all of the animatronic elements of the dinosaurs. According to Farley in another interview, he states, John Buechler brought in John Crawford to supervise all of the animatronics for the show. He took sort of a low-tech approach using a cable-controlled Waldo system, as well as radio control for the eye blinks and things like that. For those of you that don't know, the Waldo system refers to a device that allows the animatronic to move simultaneously in the way the puppeteer moves. Ted Haynes was brought in to help with some of the foam fabrication, as that's the material that they would use to make some of their dinosaurs out of. And Mike Jones was brought in to sculpt the Deinonychus. The special effects crew would start the process with concept art of the dinosaurs, then move on to creating clay models to use as a reference before moving on to creating the final product. For the main dinosaur props, the crew used a specific urethane foam material called L200, which was lightweight, aircraft-oriented material that was used to keep the dinosaurs, more specifically the full-scale T-Rex, somewhat lightweight, so transferring them from the warehouse to the filming location wasn't so difficult. They used sheet foam for the undercover of some of their dinosaurs, then put a sheet form of the L200 over the understructure, where they used heated metal tools to imprint scale patterns on the surface, which they then painted over. By the end of it, the full-scale T-Rex weighed about 450 pounds. For some of the other models, they were constructed using fiberglass and vacuum-formed plastic, which went over aluminum armatures. And inside the models were cable-actuated gears, pulleys, levers, and spring returns. And finally, a layer of foam latex skin was put over everything, which was then painted over by rubber cement paint and Pax paint. As far as the miniature sets go, Farley says that the first 7 weeks of the 10-week pre-production period was dedicated to the miniature T-Rex. A miniature set was also designed, as well as a miniature Bobcat for the final battle sequence of the movie. As cool as the full-scale T-Rex looked, its mobility was very limited, with movements made with pneumatic actuators that only really moved its arms and facial features. So whatever movements the large T-Rex couldn't perform when shot on location, they were filled in by the miniature sets that were filmed back at the studio. That, and apparently they had a camera issue on location according to Dublin, forcing them to resort to unconventional methods of filming with the miniatures for shots that they should have gotten on location.
they had a camera problem when we were on location, so we didn't get all the coverage that they wanted. So we mounted the Area 3 we were shooting the miniature stuff with on a skateboard and put the miniature bucket on it and used that for the POV shots we should have got on location. So we're dollying around on the sets and just down and dirty bootstrap, you know, again, just pull it out of your butt at the last minute.
As a result, shots of the miniatures were inserted between shots of the full-scale T-Rex in a way to make it look as natural as possible. However, it seems that the cinematography people and the special effects people were never on the same page, because Buechler had planned for some of the models to be filmed on location. For example, he was hoping that they could get some forced perspective shots with the full-scale T-Rex, along with many other planned forced perspective shots that were just not used at all. All of that stuff should have been shot on location there with the people. But as it worked out, we didn't get to that. We had to recreate in miniature that whole place. And shooting black backgrounds, it just made it look so much cheaper looking. Hardly any of the forced perspective material that we had planned was shot. I think there's only 2 or 3 forced perspective shots in the whole movie. Unfortunately for Buechler, those weren't the only planned shots that never happened. It was clear early on this film was never going to use as many dinosaurs featured in the original novel, which is why it was limited to just 2, the Deinonychus and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. However, some of you may have noticed from some of the behind-the-scenes footage of Carnosaur that there was actually a third creature that was meant to be in the film for a brief scene. This creature was a pterodactyl, and as far as I've been able to see, it's shown up in clay form and in cast form in one episode of the documentary series Movie Magic. While this is the only instance of the pterodactyl we see behind the scenes, according to the Hot-Blooded Dinosaur movie book, it's implied the pterodactyl was fully built as it was described to be a mechanical puppet, though I haven't been able to see much of it from the behind the scenes. There's actually a bit of a story to the unused pterosaur. According to the dinosaur filmography, Buechler would bring up the plans he had for the pterodactyl scene, saying it was going to be shot at the end of the movie where all the dinosaurs are dead now. So, you know, everything's fine, the government has burnt out all the bodies, and then the camera pulls back and you see this little pterodactyl. They never shot it. They never got around to shooting a lot of the stuff that they had planned. What's weird about this is that Simon also says something similar at one point during an interview, saying, "Given the budget, I knew going in that we could not blow people away with our dinosaurs the way Jurassic Park would. So I decided to bring the focus down to 2 dinosaurs. 3 if you count the appearance by a mysterious something at the film's end." I'm willing to bet this statement was referring to the pterodactyl. And since this was coming from the words of the director himself, it seemed that he had every intention of filming the scene. But for some unknown reason, maybe time constraints or last-minute interference from Corman, who maybe didn't like the idea, the scene was never shot. Simon also continues talking about ideas for the movie that fell through, including an idea that they had early on where the dinosaurs were essentially going to be used as a tool to lead up to something that was going to be more terrifying. The horror is more like David Cronenberg's body horror, and the scares are more psychological. There's also a lot of humor. Initially, we were going to use the dinosaurs as a MacGuffin and have something even scarier show up later, but that idea fell by the wayside. What that something was supposed to be is never said, and I guess we'll never know. Not everything was smooth sailing for the actors either, as they had to be brief with the filming for their scenes since the movie's production phase was under a strict time limit, and they had to work on location in the quarry at night in the freezing cold. For the actors, a lot of the filming process was just them reacting to nothing, and the scenes with the dinosaurs would be shot separately, and then all of it would be put together in post. And speaking of the strict time limit for the movie's production phase, it was 18 days. Simon had 18 days to shoot the film, get it in post-production to be edited and put together, and send it out for release. In that interview with Inverse that I mentioned earlier, Simon talked a little bit more about what was required with the movie. It had to be exactly 87 minutes long, including trailers, because that's all the physical 35mm film that would fit inside the standard shipping case. Any longer than that, and it would have to go in a bigger shipping case, and that would cost an extra $50 per case. But even after all of the issues and setbacks and money cuts, the film would finally be finished. In his interview with Fangoria, Simon would say, "This film has a 90s attitude rather than one from the 50s. In a nutshell, it's the army versus the dinosaurs. But you're going to see the army in a totally unexpected role. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that there is more things to be afraid of than the dinosaurs. These dinosaurs aren't going to be the kind we see in kids' movies. They're hungry, and there's going to be a lot of blood, guts, and gore. This is rough stuff. We didn't pull any punches. These are dinosaurs, and this is what dinosaurs do." And unsurprisingly, it became apparent early on that people were going to compare Carnosaur with Jurassic Park, with some calling it a ripoff and others saying it's nothing more than a movie trying to cash in on Jurassic Park's popularity. However, not everyone, especially the people who worked on the movie, saw it the same way. According to Clint Howard, this movie is being made for 30 times less than the budget of Jurassic Park. But I can guarantee you this will not be 30 times less of a movie. This is not a kid's movie, it's a horror story. When somebody gets bitten in half by a dinosaur, there's going to be a mess made. Despite his personal issues with the movie, Buechler would also come to its defense. "I know that Rogers had the book for a while and that Carnosaur is similar in many ways to Jurassic Park, but I don't think it's so much a matter of getting it out first as the fact that there is suddenly a reason to do a dinosaur movie." And Simon chimed in with his own thoughts as well. "This is not a ripoff of Jurassic Park. I took the title, threw out the book, and came up with a whole new story. Ultimately, this movie has more shades of the Andromeda strain with the humor of Dr. Strangelove." And Simon is correct. For something to be a ripoff, that would imply that that thing is a cheap imitation of a superior product. And yes, while Carnosaur is cheap in comparison to Jurassic Park, calling it a ripoff is not only completely unfair, but it's also just incorrect. I think the easiest way to give you an idea of what I'm talking about is to just quickly go through the movie itself. The film opens up to a credit sequence featuring a rather unsettling scene of stock footage chickens being processed in a factory. This stock footage is actually from a 1980 short film called Chickens: A Process that was made by one of the movie's editors, Richard Jettner. The footage is accompanied by this haunting and very well done score by Nigel Holton, which in my opinion is one of the best aspects of the movie. We then transition to a group of government officials, more specifically the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, also known as DARPA, who are curious of the whereabouts of the elusive Dr. Jane Tiptree, a genetic scientist who now works under the Unis Corporation, who have, under contractual obligation, allowed Dr. Tiptree 3 years of sequestered research and development for genetically modified chickens for what they think is the food industry, but in actuality, she was working to genetically engineer living, breathing dinosaurs, one of which hatches within the chicken warehouse on the poultry farm that she runs. And the hatchling manages to sneak onto a truck transporting a bunch of chickens into town before Tiptree is able to close down the plant to prevent it from getting loose. On the way to the nearby town of Climax, Nevada, the truck driver stops to investigate some noises in the back of his truck, where he's then attacked and killed by the fast-growing dinosaur, more specifically a Deinonychus. Its fast growth rate is only ever explained as a possible aberration, since the other dinosaur subjects apparently didn't grow this quickly. The prop used for this scene features the Deinonychus in its younger phase, and what's interesting about it is that it actually depicts a feathered dinosaur, and it's now going to make its way to the nearby town. However, it's not only the Deinonychus that got loose. Along with the dinosaur, a virus made by Tiptree herself is also unleashed and is quickly making its way through the residency of Climax. So far, it seems to only be causing high fevers and sneezing, but it's later revealed that the virus also impregnates women with literal dinosaur eggs. But this virus seems to be taking time to set in. While we wait, a trio of teenagers are attacked and killed by the loose Deinonychus, one of which was actually the daughter of one of the Unis employees, Jesse Paloma. Upset by the fact that it was Tiptree's animal that killed his daughter, Paloma threatens to make her operation public. sick, but she's able to trick him into thinking that she has his daughter alive, and gets him to go into a mysterious room of flashing lights and red laser barriers that's actually revealed to be the pen that holds the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which proceeds to devour Paloma alive. Going back to the Deinonychus, our main character Doc, the night guard to the Eunice-owned quarry and the sort of anti-hero of the story, at least according to how Raphael Sabarge describes his character, eventually encounters it after it slaughters a group of environmentalists that chain themselves to the construction vehicles that he's supposed to be guarding. Well, all of them except for Thrush, who doesn't really do anything in this movie, but Doc seems to have taken a liking to her anyway, and keeps her in his trailer to recover while he goes off to get some answers. He does this by sneaking his way into the Eunice laboratory and holding Tiptree at gunpoint, where she gives him the rundown of her experiment. Turns out, Tiptree hates the human race, and had dedicated her time and knowledge of genetic science to not just recreate dinosaurs, but also create a way to wipe out humans in the form of a virus that I mentioned earlier. The idea is that the virus impregnates women with a large and grotesque looking egg, to which they give birth to so that the egg can hatch a baby dinosaur. But the process of birthing the egg kills the woman so that it cuts away the major component of human life. If all women are infected and killed by this dinosaur egg virus, it would only be a matter of time before men eventually perish as well, since they'll have no way of continuing the species. Then, with the human race gone, the dinosaurs can reclaim their world. This eventually gets the attention of DARPA, who managed to trace the attacks back to Eunice after inspecting the salival DNA from a tissue sample from the body of the very first victim. Turns out there was a molecular configuration, or trademark, that's unique to the Eunice company that was found within the sample. And because they believe it to be a virus, they get the government involved and the entire town of Climax is put under quarantine. Meanwhile, the local sheriff, whose name is Sheriff Fowler, responds to a distress call about an animal attacking the local pet shop, which was on a set that was actually filmed on Corman's backlot, which explains why this part of town has no sidewalks and is limited to just one store, payphone, and fire hydrant. And it's here Fowler actually manages to shoot the Deinonychus down. He goes over to finish the animal off, but before he can, the raptor impales Fowler with its sickle claw. Before Fowler goes down for good, he blows the raptor's head off, finally ending its killing spree. But where the raptor's killing spree ends, the government's killing spree begins, as they had attempted to figure out other methods to contain the very fast-spreading virus, even going as far as suggesting breeding a new generation of females with artificial wombs to preserve the human race. This is actually a common thing with the Carnosaur franchise, where they will introduce a very strange but interesting idea, but that idea is never expanded on or revisited. In this case, it's because the government concludes the best way to get a handle on this whole situation, both to keep the virus from spreading and to keep this from reaching the public, is to gun down all of the town's residents. Going back to Doc, he threatens Tiptree for the antivirus, to which she gives him after he threatens to destroy her dinosaur eggs, and as Doc leaves, the scientist gives birth alien-style to her own baby dinosaur. Along with this, the T-Rex also escapes and makes its way to the quarry. Oh yeah, in another example of an interesting idea that doesn't really get explored, the movie actually attempts to incorporate the concept of genetic memory. Earlier in the movie, Thrush explains that the quarry used to be a dinosaur migration route millions of years ago, and Doc thinks that the escaped T-Rex from Tiptree's lab is going straight to where they are because it's following that migration route that it remembers through genetic memory or instinct. Again, the idea is never explored again, and the final battle sequence takes place, with Doc and Thrush using the Bobcats from the quarry to fight off and eventually disembowel the T-Rex. But there's no happy ending to this movie, because government agents show up to Doc's trailer, shoots him and Thrush, and burns the entire place down, destroying any evidence left behind by Eunice, including the antivirus. When you really break this movie down, you'll realize that Carnosaur is literally the exact antithesis of Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park is a big-budget, family-friendly sci-fi thriller. Carnosaur is a low-budget, gory sci-fi horror. Jurassic Park changed the film industry with its use of practical effects blended with CGI. Carnosaur was 100% practical effects because Corman didn't even want to bother with opticals or stop motion, let alone CGI. Jurassic Park wanted to show the world the most recent view on dinosaurs while still taking creative liberties to making them unique and somewhat accurate for the time. Carnosaur has dinosaurs that were specifically made to be in the 50s-60s style where they stood up straight and dragged their tails because Corman didn't give a shit about accuracy. Jurassic Park has many themes and messages, like how it's a commentary on man's hubris over nature, or the dangers of playing with a force that you don't understand and that opening Pandora's box can lead to dire consequences. Carnosaur can be interpreted as a commentary of the disturbing world behind the food industry, and its gross and or unethical operations that include the mistreatment of animals, or how our food is processed, and so on. Because of Jurassic Park's Hollywood status, they had to follow a set of regulations so that they could maintain their PG-13 rating to push their movie out to a wider demographic. Because Carnosaur was made through independent means, more liberties were taken for doing all of the things that Hollywood couldn't or wouldn't do, including having some gore and an unhappy ending, earning the movie an R rating. I could keep going, but I think you get the idea. Carnosaur is not a ripoff of Jurassic Park, but it was made for the purpose of capitalizing off of it, and it worked. Considering the kind of businessman Corman is, I wouldn't put it past him if he purposely made this film to be as opposite of Jurassic Park as possible. Not just to keep people from mislabeling it as a ripoff, but also because he knew they were inevitably going to be compared. And this would make for great marketing, and it did. News segments and movie magazines from all over were covering Carnosaur and its loose connections with Jurassic Park, making comparisons, poking fun at the film's synopsis, and going over some of the behind the scenes for the movie. There was even a point where Corman literally chooses Jurassic Park over his own movie, but still manages to give his movie merit by making a great fucking point.
Much as I'm proud of Carnosaur, I would probably recommend Jurassic Park, but I think we can agree that I would hope that people would see 2 dinosaur movies this summer. As a matter of fact, it would make a very interesting comparison.
I mean, let's be honest, who's going to say no to 2 dinosaur movies? In short, they had fun with the marketing, and people clearly enjoyed it because Carnosaur wouldn't do too bad in the box office at all. The movie was set to get a regional theatrical release in about 400 theaters on June 11th, 1993, to feature right next to Jurassic Park, but this date was changed to about a month before Jurassic Park on May 13th, 1993. According to the American Film Institute catalog site, the April 12, 1993 HR noted that the film was originally scheduled to open June 11th, 1993, the same day as the similarly themed blockbuster Jurassic Park, starring Ladd's daughter, Laura Dern. However, an April 22nd, 1993 HR article announced that Roger was expected to premiere the film May 13th, 1993, at the Wilshire Theater in Ogden, Utah, to coincide with the city's newly opened George S. Eccles Dinosaur Park. The 200-print regional release would occur the following day, May 14th, 1993, in Salt Lake City, Utah, Des Moines, Iowa, Kansas City, Minnesota, and Northern Florida. Also, we should talk about that release date real quick. Now, I don't think anyone is truly under the illusion that just because Carnosaur came out first, that doesn't mean that Jurassic Park ripped anything off from it. But the internet can surprise me sometimes. And there might be a person or two out there that might genuinely believe that. I mean, aside from Jurassic Park's 2-year production versus Carnosaur's 12 to 3 week long production, Corman also says it himself that he doesn't think Jurassic Park stole anything from them.
It's a surprisingly similar basis for the story to Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park, which was written a few years later, has pretty much the same scientific rationale, and I don't think they stole anything from us.
The most he says is that the 2 source materials have the same scientific rationale, which is literally just referring to the fact that both feature dinosaurs being brought back to life from DNA found within fossilized materials. As far as Carnosaur's success goes, despite having a budget somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million, Carnosaur would make back $1.8 million from the box office. But this wasn't even the bulk of its success. That would come when the movie was eventually released on VHS. Carnosaur would make $5.5 million in VHS sales and rentals, banking on all of the parents that were too cheap to buy their kids Jurassic Park, so instead they bought them Carnosaur. All jokes aside, the Carnosaur movie did seem to attract a lot of people. However, in the end, the movie was heavily criticized and panned for its low quality. On the movie review show Siskel and Ebert, ran by Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, Siskel gives the Carnosaur movie a thumbs up for its wacky but fun plot, whereas Ebert considers it to be one of, if not the worst film of that year. Then there was Brosnan. Like I mentioned earlier, Brosnan was kept completely out of the loop during the movie's production. He would hear rumors about what was going on, but from his perspective, it was all a waiting game to see how the Carnosaur adaptation would come out. Though he was given a little bit of hope when his film journalist friend, Alan Jones, would make another trip to Hollywood and actually see some of the movie's development phase. He would come back telling Brosnan that he was quite impressed with how the dinosaurs looked. Later on, when the movie finally finished up, it would be put through test screenings, which apparently had positive receptions, and when Brosnan heard about this as well, he grew more excited. This would all change when Alan Jones finally got a chance to see the movie himself, only to return to Brosnan telling him that it was crap. In what is seemingly the last thing Brosnan had to say on the matter, he states, "I've since seen it on video, and yes, it is crap. And, compared to the film of Jurassic Park, the dinosaurs are laughable, but it's interesting crap. And thanks to the movie, the novel has been reprinted both in the States and here in the UK. And in fact, we are having a relaunch party for the book at my drinking club this very night. The video will also be screened, and I will no doubt take the lead in shouting abuse at the screen." Real quick, to add on about one of the only good things Brosnan said about the movie, the Carnosaur book would be re-released by Tor in August 1993, and Galanx in October 1993 with updated covers that promote the movie. Going back to the film's reception, finally, we have Adam Simon, who was hearing all of these critiques made towards his movie and just felt very ashamed about it. For a while, I felt so embarrassed I couldn't even leave the house. I thought it was literally going to be the death of my career. In my personal opinion on Carnosaur, I don't think it's a great movie, but I don't think it's bad either. I'll admit, I wasn't too crazy about it when I first watched it a little while back. I just thought it was a movie that took itself way too seriously for the concept it had. But since doing all of the research for this video and knowing what I know, the movie's grown on me. Yeah, that doesn't stop the movie from having so many flaws, and a lot of the criticism it's faced with is somewhat justified. That being said, I will say, Simon was very clearly trying to approach this film as an art piece, and it's clear that he wanted to say something with it. He wanted it to have some kind of message and be taken seriously, especially since he was initially promised the funds to execute it in this way. But at the end of the day, this was a Corman production. The budget decrease and time limits bogged down any ideas he could have had to make this film the way he envisioned. And only 2 weeks from production, no less. So he was forced to work with what he had. And given the circumstances, I think Simon created the best possible picture he could. And just attempting to create something like Carnosaur, something that was so different in the dinosaur film world that really went against the grain of what was being released during that point in time, is commendable. Okay, that was everything I had to say about the story of the first Carnosaur movie. Holy shit, we still have 6 movies to cover.